All right, Khan, Shalom, Shalom, Israel, Shalom to the Torah, Shaz, Yasha, Allah, giving the course, Allah, the glory and praise unto the Most High God, Yahweh, in the name of the God, Son, Yahweh Shah, this brother Yasha, Allah, with the watchman for Israel, W5, LA, through the Spirit. And essentially, I'm gonna get straight into this through the Spirit. Essentially, as you can see from the title of this video, we be going into what? The history of the scribes. You understand? History of the scribes. So it's basically the idea that the Lord kind of put in my mind to go into being the scribe over LA in terms of W5 camp. So, but one thing Israel just want Israel to understand is the importance of the scribes, right? The importance of the scribes and how important they are. You understand according or when we read the Bible, right? When we read the Bible, because the only way the Bible could have been compiled, contextualized, written down, you know what I'm saying, was via what? The scribes. It was literally via the scribes. All right. And these men had to write it down. They had to, the word of the Lord had to go out, and these men had to actually write it down. You understand? So that's why it's so important for us, because without the scribes, you won't have no Bible. All right. Without the scribes, you would not have a Bible. So that's why it's just important, to go into, appreciating the scribes. The Lord said in the book of, let's go to Sirach, chapter 44. I'm gonna kick it off with that through the Spirit. All right, let's go to Sirach, chapter 44 and verse 8. All right. Now this is a famous precept. Everybody don't, right? Let's read it real quick through the Spirit. So this is Sirach 44 and verse 1. It says, "Let us now praise famous men and our fathers that begat us." So, Sirach is talking about what? Let us now praise famous men. And not every scribe is famous for real, right? Not every scribe is going to be famous, Salakia. But we know that there are certain scribes that's accredited, to writing certain portions of the Bible. Today we're going to go into Ezra. All right. Today we're going to go into Ezra. I'm gonna go down to verse 4. Leaders of the people by their counsels and by their knowledge a learning meet for the people, wise and eloquent are their instructions. So, and this is a perfect example because we know that Ezra, well, we're about to go into it right now through the Spirit, Lord willing. But Ezra was one of the leaders of the people, in so much that our people viewed Moses, Slakia, Ezra, as a second Moses. All right, and we're going to try to figure out why they kind of saw Ezra, they kind of put him up there along with Moses. We know that Moses was one of the leaders of Israel, all right, alongside with who? Yahweh Shah, Moses, Ezra. You got the prophets, David. You have a lot of great men who are great leaders in Israel. You know, so on and so forth. You have so many. And so Ezra is just one of them, and Ezra is very important. Because he's a principal scribe. And so I want to go into the history of the scribes. So this is going to be a series, Lord willing. It's going to be a series going into the different scribes and their history, their life, and what works are they accredited to writing. All right, if that makes sense. So first, I want to just kick it off with the definition of the word scribe. First of all, what does it mean? What is the definition of the word scribe? Right now, Salaki, before I do that, right, let me just go right here through the Spirit, right? Okay, Khan. So let me pull this up through the Spirit real quick, right? Pull this up through the Spirit. Shalom, shalom. It's everybody on the live right now, right? So this is the Hebrew word for scribe. Now here's the first precept we want to bring out. So remember, if anybody has read Ezra, okay, Ezra doesn't, the prophet Ezra, the scribe Ezra, he doesn't even appear in his own book until the 7th chapter. There are 10 chapters of Ezra. All right, there's the 10 chapters of Ezra, but Ezra does not even appear in his own book until the 7th chapter. Right, so let's read that. Ezra chapter 7, verse 1. Now, after these things, in the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, Ezra the son of Seraiah, the son of Azariah, the son of Hilkiah. Right, now it goes down to name his lineage. Right, verse number 5, the son of Abishai, the son of Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the chief priest. You see that? So Ezra was, he could reckon himself amongst the genealogy, right? That's for one. When you read Ezra, real quick, let's go to Ezra chapter 2, verse 51, 59. This is a precept that we use out on the highways and byways to prove that you have to, that one has to come from their father or Slakia. One would, in order to prove your nationality, you would have to claim your father's house. Who is your father? That's what we ask Jake or Eve, wherever the case may be, even these other nations. What's your father? Right? We don't ask for their mother because we know that according to the Bible, that's how we reckon our genealogies through the father. So when we go to Ezra chapter 2, verse 59, it says, and these were they which went up from Telamah, Tel-Harsa, Cherub, Adon, and Immer, but they could not show their father's house in their seed, whether they were of Israel. So they couldn't show their father's house, they couldn't show their seed, whether they were of Israel. So they couldn't even show if they were Israelites. You understand? And there was other people. Salaki, let me get this real quick in verse 62. These sought their register among those that were reckoned by genealogy, but they were not found. Therefore, were they, as polluted, put from the priesthood. So they were put from the priesthood. You understand? You can't just come up to the priesthood and say, I'm a priest. You would have to prove it via your father's lineage. Ezra was one of the men that could prove their father's lineage. That's why it says his lineage right here. It's plain. He was the son of Seraiah, the son of Azariah, the son of Hilkiah. You understand? And it goes on to name his fathers. And if I'm not mistaken, one of his fathers was one of the last priests of the Solomon under Solomon's temple. All right, which made him even more esteemed. All right, because when you read the narrative of Ezra and Nehemiah, you still had the certain lineage that had seen Solomon's temple, right? That had seen the glory of it, or that had, the elders, right? The elders, when you get that precept, Salakia, let me see if I can get that real quick, right? Let me see if I can get that. Oh, Salakia wept, right? And Ezra, if I can't get it, that's fine. But I just wanted to prove this real quick. And okay, Khan. Yeah, so when you go to Ezra chapter 3, verse 12, right? I'm gonna start verse 11. And they sang together by course and praising and giving thanks unto the Lord, because he is good, for his mercy endure forever toward Israel. And all the people shouted with a great shout when they had praised the Lord, because the foundation of the house of the Lord was laid. So when you're reading the narrative of Ezra, okay, in Ezra chapter 3, well, really from Ezra chapter 1 all the way to verse Salakia, Ezra chapter 1 all the way to Ezra chapter 6, right? All those chapters in between there, it's detailing the ministry of Zerubbabel, because you had three men, right? You had three men. You had Zerubbabel, you had Ezra, and you had Nehemiah, that were sent back from Babylon, right, to rebuild the temple, right? Well, I should say Zerubbabel was focused on the temple as well as Ezra, but Nehemiah was focused on building Jerusalem, rebuilding Jerusalem. And you can also read about that prophecy in Daniel, okay, chapter 9. Not to get too deep, but you can also read about that prophecy, as the Lord said that there will be a rebuilding, right? It's kind of, well, might as well just get it anyway. Why not? Right? Let's get this real quick. Let's go to Ezra, right? Chapter it's Salakia, Daniel, I said. Let's go to Daniel chapter 9. Right? So this is so this video is not going to be, what I'm saying, just all fun and games, man. Right? It's not going to be, you're not going to see Esau getting his boot licked in this video right here. All right, or it's like you licking our boots, licking our boots. You're not going to see, Eve kind of rebelling against the prophets or anything like that. This is for brothers and sisters that really want to learn in this thing. The history, right? Our history. You understand, right? The things that's that's not really sought in, or sought, or talked about, in really or the importance for real, of understanding how the spirit of our forefathers was in, right? Because I'm also going to not only touch on the history, I'm also going to go to a little bit of textual criticism, just a little bit. That's not why I'm doing this video though. But in order for me to talk about the works that Ezra is accredited of writing, I have to go into textual criticism. So we're going to talk a little bit about that as well, Lord willing. And also, going into, I really want to touch on the spirit that Ezra was in. Okay, because Ezra moved in the same spirit as Moses. All right, and I'm going to show you that as well. So real quick, let me get that through the spirit, Lord willing. And Daniel chapter 9, all right, and verse number, I'm gonna start at verse 25. It says, know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore it and to build Jerusalem unto the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks, right? And those 7 weeks is not a literal 7 weeks. 7 weeks, right? It's actually let me just keep going. It says 7 weeks and 62 weeks, right? The street shall be built again and the wall even in troublous times. So that's not a literal, right? 7 weeks and 62 weeks, right? Because remember 7 and 60, right? 60 is actually 60, right? As it would say right here. See, 60 is 60 because that score means 20. So 3 times 20 is 60. So 62 weeks, right? In the 7 weeks, right? Which will make 69 weeks. Now, this is not, we're not going into the 70 weeks breakdown, but essentially what this is going into is just a prophecy, right? That the street will be built again and the wall even in troublous times. And so the going forth of the commandment to restore it and to build Jerusalem, that's talking about the decree made by Cyrus, king of Persia, when you read Ezra chapter 1. All right, let's just get that real quick in Ezra chapter 1 and verse 1. It says, now in the first year, Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord might be by the mouth of Jeremiah might be fulfilled, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all, right? So, let me see if this is working through the spirit, right? Let me know if the audio is not working or anything like that. Through the spirit. Okay, Khan, it is working. All right, all praises. Okay, Khan. So let's keep going. It says, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation throughout all his kingdom and put it also in writing, saying, thus said Cyrus, king of Persia, the Lord God of heaven had given me all the kingdoms of the earth, and he had charged me to build him an house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. You see that? So this is the decree that was made by Cyrus, king of Persia. Remember, Ezra, Nehemiah, along with if I'm not mistaken, Esther as well. These books detail us, or the Israelites under the Persian captivity. Okay, because you have certain books which detail the Israelites under certain captivities. Isaiah, Jeremiah with Babylon, right? Isaiah also touches on a little bit about Assyrian captivity as well for the northern kingdom. But you have, with every prophet, they always detail, or they're always set in a certain captivity for real. I read about Haggai in Ezra. He's mentioned in Ezra, right? You can read about Haggai, you can read about Zerubbabel. These are prophets that were contemporary, even Zechariah, you understand, and even Malachi. So these prophets, they lived around the same time, you see, and they were under the same captivity. So they detail the time in which Israel is living under the Persian captivity. But the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, right? Let's just get a picture of him right through the spirit. The Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, this man who was a heathen, right? But he allowed he allowed Israel through him for us to go back from Babylon, because right after the Babylonian Empire fell, right, the Achaemenid Empire, started to rise in power. Okay, so Cyrus, so the Lord through Cyrus allowed us to go back to our land. He allowed us to go back to our land and to rebuild Jerusalem through the Spirit. All right, because remember, our temple was broken down, our city was destroyed, and the wall was destroyed as well. So that's why the Lord sent these men, right? Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah chiefly, right, to be leaders of the people, to lead them back and to essentially rebuild everything that has to be rebuilt. All right. But going back to this through the Spirit in Ezra chapter 3, right? When you go to Ezra chapter 3 verse 12, I just want to touch on this point. But many of the priests and Levites and chief of the fathers, who were ancient men that had seen the first house, when the foundation of this house was laid before their eyes, wept with a loud voice, and many shouted aloud for joy, so that the people could not discern the noise of the joy from the house, from the noise of the weeping of the people, for the people shouted with a loud shout, and the noise was heard afar off. You still had ancient men that were living during this time of Zerubbabel, chiefly, when they had successfully rebuilt the temple. The Israelites that had not seen the first house. Now, the first house is talking about Solomon's temple, right? It's talking about Solomon's temple through the Spirit. Let me bring that up real quick through the Spirit. It's talking about Solomon's temple, right? How come this is not through the okay, Khan Salaki. All right, Khan Salaki. Let me bring this up for you through the Spirit. Yeah, so it's talking about Solomon's temple. All right. It's talking about Solomon's temple. Let's bring that up real quick. All right. So it says what? Actually, what did it say right here? So it says Solomon's temple, also known as the first temple, was a temple in Jerusalem believed to have existed between the 10th and 6th centuries BC. So you still had ancient men during this time, because remember, Ezra, he lived during what time? You know, he wasn't living during the time of Moses. All right. Sometimes you just want to understand what time certain prophets and priests and scribes, et cetera, are living. You know, you don't want to say that Ezra was living during the time of Yahushua. That's totally off. Like, that's totally off the timeline, right? That's not even in circa. That's not even like, around. No, Ezra lived around roughly 400 years before Yahushua. All right. So let's read this real quick. So Ezra, or Esdras, depending on what language you translate his name from. All right. Ezra will be Hebrew and Esdras will be Latin or Greek. It says 480 to 440 BCE. So certain people, they have disputes about when he lived, but we do know for sure that he lived during the 5th century BC. That's undoubtedly. He did live during the time of the 5th century BC. So that'll be the 400s. All right, the 400 BC era. All right. And remember, BC, depending on how you look at it, BC means before Christ, but it could also mean, or BCE means before Common Era. So BCE is really used by secular historians. BC will be used by historians that would, not all the time, but generally believe in the Bible, right? And believe in that these men are not only, just historical figures, but they also are biblical figures as well. All right. So it says what? Ezra the priest was a important, they say Jewish, right? But we know what it's talking about. He was a Jew. He was an Israelite. All right. There's nothing Jewish about him. He's an Israelite. He's an Israelite scribe and priest in the early Second Temple period. So when you look at this, right, you look at Solomon's temple, there were still men. Why is this picture the first picture? Like, this is madness. How is that the first picture that pops up? Right. But anyways, so this was like this is a depiction, rather, of Solomon's temple. All right. And according to the elders, or according to the ancients, and according to the Bible, I mean, this temple was probably one of the best temples that were ever created, for real, when you look at that. So when you read the narrative of Ezra, it's saying that there were certain men that were weeping because when they saw the temple, the second temple that they had built, right? They were what? They started crying, man. They started crying because it says that it's like you who were ancient men that had seen the first house when the foundation of this house was laid before the eyes, wept with a loud voice, and many shouted aloud for joy. So you had a whole tumult going on after they was finished rebuilding the temple. So and henceforth they called it the second temple, right? The second temple. Let's look at look that up through the spirit real quick. So second temple. So when they were rebuilding the temple, you had what's called what? They called it the second temple, right? Now the ancients started crying when they saw the second temple, because it was like, this looks nothing like Solomon's, man. This looks nothing like the first one that was built. You understand? And so that's what was going on, right? That's what was going on through the spirit. That's why they were crying, you know? And so I just want to touch on that point real quick. But nevertheless, going on or moving on, Ezra does not appear in his own book until, right, chapter 7. Now I want to go to, because I know I said I want to get the definition. So I want to go to get the definition of a scribe. So let's go to Ezra chapter 7, verse 6. It says, then this Ezra went up from Babylon, and he was a ready scribe in the law of Moses. So this, look at how it describes Moses. I mean, it's like it describes Ezra. He was a ready scribe in the law of Moses. You know, let's get that definition of the word scribe through the spirit in a blue letter. Right? It's the Hebrew word sapar. And as a verb, it can mean to count, you know, recount, relate, to count things, to number, take account of, reckon. So when you're acting as a scribe, you're counting things out, you're numbering things, you're taking account of things, right? That's what you're doing, to recount something, to rehearse, you know, to declare. As a noun, that's what that word means. But as a verb. But as a noun, it means what? Enumerator. So what is an enumerator? Let's get that definition real quick. So an enumerator is a person employed in taking a census of the population. So basically somebody that takes a census. You know, and that's essentially what Ezra was doing as well. When you read the book of Ezra, anybody that's read Ezra or has read Nehemiah, you know that there's records inside there. It keeps names, and it keeps how many people came back, right? It details the numbers in which they counted, in which the Israelites came back from Babylon. You can read about that, I believe, in Ezra 2nd chapter. But it says what? Enumerator, muster officer. So that's interesting as well, because that word could also mean a muster officer. And so when you look up that word for muster officer, look at what it means. So a muster in the military organization, the term muster is a process or event of accounting for members in a military unit. You see that? A muster roll is the list of members of a military unit, often including their rank and the dates they left. So like they joined or left. So that's actually interesting, because as a scribe, you're not only counting the people, you're also counting the what? The officers, like you're the military. You're also counting the army as well. You know, and it's not Israel. We're acting as an army right now. You know, so that's what's also interesting about that, right? It says what? Secretary, scribe, enumerator, muster officer, secretary, learned man, scribe. So it could also mean learned man. So if you're a scribe, you're a learned man. That's what that means. You understand? Hey, if you're a scribe, guess what? You're learned in what? The law. You're learned in the Bible. You'll learn overall. Because remember, in order for you to scribe out things, you need to read and write. You need to know how to read and write. You need to know grammar. You need to know punctuation. You need to know all these certain things. Or else what you're writing now is not going to make sense in any language, right? If you don't have those things, you're not going to be able to, if you don't know how to read or write, how are you going to write things down, right? It just doesn't make any sense, all right? So as a scribe, scribes are learned men. Okay, scribes are learned men, even when you go into the definition of that. So I want to keep reading this article through the spirit. Actually, Slack, let me finish this precept out. All right, Ezra chapter 7 and verse 6. It says, then Ezra went up from Babylon, and he was a ready scribe in the law of Moses, which the Lord God of Israel had given, and the king granted him all his requests according to the hand of the Lord his God upon him. So the king granted him all his requests. So Ezra was not only a chief priest, right? He was not only a priest, he was not only a scribe, but he was also well favored amongst the king. All right. It says what? And there went up some of the children of Israel, and the priests, and the Levites, and the singers, and the porters, and the Nethinims onto Jerusalem in the 7th year of Artaxerxes the king. So now let me keep going down though. Verse 10. For Ezra had prepared his heart to seek the law of the Lord, and to do it, and to teach in Israel statutes and judgments. So it's common that the scribes would be learned men in the law. When you go up to the New Testament, when Yahushua really talks about the scribes, it's really talking about men that were very learned in the law, right? You read about that in Luke. You can read about lawyers, right? And a lawyer really is somebody that is a doctor in the law, somebody that's really learned in the law of the Most High. All right, that's really what a lawyer is in its correct definition. But it says that what Ezra had prepared his heart to seek the law of the Lord and to do it. So Ezra, his mind was towards the law. So I just want to highlight that real quick. Ezra, his mind was toward the law. You know, as men of the Lord, I mean, we look up to Ezra, because not only was he a leader, not only was he a scribe, not only was he a prophet, but he was also a priest, and he had prepared his heart to seek the law. I mean, he did all things, literally. He was doing everything. You know, as they say, he was a jack of all trades. So his heart was perfect with the Most High. I mean, he prepared his heart to see the law of the Lord and to do it and to teach in Israel statutes and judgments, man. You know, so he already had in his mind that he wanted to teach Israel about the statutes and judgments, being a priest, because that's what the priests of the Lord are supposed to do. Let's get that in the book of Malachi through the Spirit. All right, I'm gonna get this in the book of Malachi, chapter 2. All right, Malachi chapter 2 and verse number let's see here, 6. It says, the law of truth was in his mouth, and iniquity was not found in his lips. He walked with me in peace and equity, and it turned many away from iniquity. For the priest's lips should keep knowledge, and they should seek the law at his mouth, for he is a messenger of the Lord of hosts. So that's what Moses, I mean, it's like that's what Ezra was doing through the Spirit. He had in his mind to teach the law of the Lord. All right. He had prepared his heart to seek the law of the Lord and to do it, man. You know, and that's what really the Lord is looking at, man. You know, our heart. Did not the Lord say, "Hey, I search the rein in the hearts, man." Right? Let's get that real quick to the Spirit. It's the book of Jeremiah, chapter 17. All right, let's go to Jeremiah 17 and verse number 10. I, the Lord, search the heart, and I try the reins, even to give every man according to his ways and according to the fruit of his doings. So Ezra, his heart was toward what? The Lord, and the heart and the law of the Lord, man. And to do it and to teach in Israel statutes and judgments, being a priest. And that's what scribes do as well. Right? And you see how Ezra is mentioned. Ezra the priest, the scribe, even the scribe of the words of the commandments of the Lord. You see that? And so when you go down to this chapter, Artaxerxes is giving a what? He's writing a letter to Ezra. All right, he's writing a letter to Ezra, and he's saying to in this letter that, guess what? Let Ezra do what he wants. Whatever Ezra says, do it. Right? Whatever is commanded by the God of heaven, let it be done. You know what I'm saying? And we know that Artaxerxes also sent gold, right, to Ezra to bring back onto Jerusalem. All right. And so I'm going to go to verse 25. It says, and thou, Ezra, after the wisdom of thy God, which is in thine hand, set magistrates and judges, which may judge all the people that are beyond the river, all such as know the laws of thy God, and teach ye them that know them not. You see that? And so, you know, as scribes, we look up to Ezra, like I said, because he knew the law, you know, like that. I mean, when you read Ezra, you read Nehemiah as well. They were reading the whole law. They read the whole law, man. You know, They were literally reading the whole law. Even when you go to the book of Nehemiah, I know certain brothers might bring this out at camp, but let's just get this real quick. In Nehemiah chapter 8, and I think I want it. Let's see here. Nehemiah chapter 8 and verse 1. And all the people gathered themselves together as one man into the street that was before the gate, the water gate, and they spake unto Ezra the scribe to bring the book of the law of Moses, which the Lord had commanded to Israel. And Ezra the priest brought the law before the congregation, both of men and women, and all that could hear with understanding upon the first day of the 7th month. Right now, I'm skipping down to verse 10, or it's like verse 8. So they read in the book of the law distinctly and gave the sense and caused them to understand and read. So that's what was going on, right? Ezra, he would read the law and he would also give the sense. So he understood it, right? He understood the law. He was keeping the law. You understand? Along with Nehemiah as well. So we see here the spirit that Ezra was in. All right, we see the spirit that Ezra was in. And now let's keep going though. And whosoever will not do the law of thy God and the law of the king, let judgment be executed speedily upon him, whether it be unto death or to banishment or to compensation of goods or to imprisonment. So the king was saying that, look, if you don't follow the words of Ezra, if you don't follow the words of Ezra, if you don't follow, right, my words that I'm telling you to keep, right, I'm telling you to obey Ezra, guess what? You could be put to death, or you could be banished, or you can go to jail. You know what I'm saying? Now I'm gonna keep going to verse 27. Watch this. It says, "Blessed be the Lord God of our fathers, which have put such a thing as this in the king's heart to beautify the house of the Lord, which is at Jerusalem, and have extended mercy unto me before the king and his counselors, and before all the king's mighty princes. And I was strengthened as the hand of the Lord my God was upon me, and I gathered together out of Israel chief men to go up with me." So Ezra was moving with chief men. You see that? It wasn't moving with just some random dudes, man. So this shows you the power that Ezra had. He was moving with chief men. First of all, he was favored by the whole king of an empire, right? And secondly, he was moving with chief men of Israel as well. He was moving the chief men, right? He was setting in order things, teaching the law of the Most High. This is a mighty man. This is a very, very mighty man, a very mighty scribe through the Spirit. Let's see what other precept I want to get on Ezra, right? Now, yeah, also I want to touch on, let's go real quick to Britannia, I believe that's what it's called through the Spirit. But I want to get this from Britannica, okay? Ezra, Hebrew Ezra, flourished 4th century BC, Babylon and Jerusalem. Religious leader of the Jews who returned from exile, and Babylon reformer who reconstituted the so-called, right, Jewish community on the basis of the Torah, law, or the regulations of the first 5 books of the Old Testament. His work helped make Judaism a religion in which law was central, enabling the Jews to survive as a community when they were dispersed all over the world. You see that? Now I want to skip down to this. So important was he in the eyes of his people that later tradition regarded him as no less than the second Moses. So they literally, right, our people, along with other people as well, you know, saw Ezra as a second Moses, man, because of the things that he did, that he set in order the nation, man. And that because of Ezra, you know, Ezra and Nehemiah is written as well, right? Ezra and Nehemiah can be written in the history alongside of it. But not only because of that, or not only because of Ezra were those books written, well, because Israel was put back in its place, man. You know, after the exiling, after the Babylonian exile, it says knowledge of Ezra is deprived from the biblical books of Ezra and Nehemiah, supplemented by the apocryphal not included in the Jewish and Protestant canons of the Old Testament. Book of First Ezra, Latin Gate form, a form of the name Ezra. Now, that's going a little bit into the writings that he's accredited. I don't want to touch on that yet. I want to touch on really the precepts I wanted to get out, you know, going into the spirit of Ezra. And then, we can kind of, if we have time through the Spirit, touch on the see that. Not even talking about that, man. Nowhere near Galatians. Nowhere near Galatians at all. Right? It's just crazy. But anyway, can't let that damn disrupt the life. Right? Let's keep going through the Spirit though. So hold on. What was this at? Through the Spirit? Okay, come right here. So I don't really want to get into the textual criticism just yet in terms of the works that he is accredited of writing. He is accredited of writing Ezra and Nehemiah. However, certain scholars dispute that, he couldn't have wrote the whole thing. Now we know that according to the earlier manuscripts that we have, the Hebrew manuscripts, Ezra and Nehemiah was always compiled as one book. It was always seen as one book altogether. It wasn't until later when you had different translations come out, like the Latin Vulgate, right? The Latin Vulgate by Jerome. You also had, after the Latin Vulgate, you had tons of, Greek manuscripts as well. Alongside with the the Latin Vulgate. Even prior to that, you had Greek manuscripts. You also had other manuscripts as well come out, in different languages, like in Arabic, obviously later now, English, right? One of the last ones for real, English. But what I'm trying to say is the newer translations and the newer canons separated the two, right? They separated the two, and the names in which they named these two books is different depending on what canon you're looking at. All right. So essentially, before I go there, I want to hit some precepts. Just going into the spirit that Ezra was in through the Spirit. All right, it's going into the spirit that Ezra was moving in. So let's go to Ezra chapter 9 and verse number 1. Now, when these things were done, the princes came to me, saying, the people of Israel and the priests and the Levites had not separated themselves from the people of the lands, doing according to their abominations, even of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Egyptians, and the Amorites. For they have taken of their daughters for themselves and for their sons, so that the holy seed have mingled themselves with the people of those lands. Yea, the hand of the princes and rulers have been chief in this trespass. So when Ezra had heard those words, what did he do? We should yeah. You know what I'm saying? Let's go get with the heathen, man. Right? Let's go get with the heathen. Now it's all good. Now you Christians, when Christians read Ezra and they read Nehemiah, they're very confused. Right? Oh man, that's not Christian at all. Right? Why can't we all be one? How come they didn't get it? It's because it was before Christ. Look, it was never about that. Nehemiah 5:9 says what? That the heathen are enemies. That's how Ezra and Nehemiah, they're in the same spirit. You know what I'm saying? They're not, Nehemiah is not disagreeing with Ezra. If Nehemiah said, okay, yeah, the heathen are enemies, Ezra's not going to say, yeah, you're wrong. He's not going to say that. They're in the same mind, right? They're contemporaries, first of all. And second of all, no Israelite really saw the heathen as our friends for real, right? When I'm saying Israelite, I'm talking about Israelite in his right mind during this time. All right. Even when you read Ezra chapter 4, what does it say? All right. When you read Ezra chapter 4, what does it say there? Go to Ezra chapter 4, verse 1. Now when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the children of the captivity builded the temple into the Lord God of Israel, then they came to Zerubbabel and to the chief of the fathers and said unto them, let us build with you, for we seek your God as ye do, and we do sacrifice unto him since the days of Hadon, king of Ashur, which brought us up hither. So when these heathen came to Zerubbabel and says like, hey man, let us build with you. We worship the same God. Let's build together, right? Let us help you build, your temple. Now, let's see what Zerubbabel said. Right? Jeshua right? And let's see what the rest of the chief of the fathers of Israel said. Let's go to verse 3. But Zerubbabel and Jeshua and the chief of the fathers of Israel said unto them, ye have nothing to do with us to build an house unto our Lord. It's like unto God, our God. But we ourselves together will build unto the Lord God of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, had commanded us. So you so they never, our people never, when you all right, so I'm not going to say never. All right, I'm not going to say never, but during this time, Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah, the chief men, the chief leaders of our people, were not having that. They was not trying to be with the heathen. All right. So that's why when Christians read Ezra and Nehemiah, they're very confused. Right? They're very confused. Because they're like, man, how could Nehemiah do that? They're just marrying, heathen women. What's wrong with that? I mean, John 3:16, and all nations, tongues, kindreds, Revelation 7 and 9. I mean, everybody's going to be holding hands in hand. It's just before Christ. They were mean before Christ. Yeah, the Israelites, the Jews, they were just mean before Christ. No, man. It's the same spirit. New Testament, Old Testament is the same spirit. All right. Our people, the leaders of our people didn't want to have to do anything with the heathen, man. They didn't want to make a covenant with the heathen. So that's why when Ezra heard that the sons of Israel, the people of Israel, is not separating themselves from the people of the other nations, the nations that the Lord literally told us not to get with, right? In Deuteronomy chapter 7. What did Ezra do? Let's go to verse 3. And when I heard this thing, I rent my garment and my mantle and plucked off the hair of my head and of my beard and sat down astonished. Then were assembled unto me everyone that trembled at the words of the God of Israel, because of the transgression of those that had been carried away. And I sat there astonished unto the evening sacrifice. So Ezra literally rent his garment. He rent his garment, man. First of all, that means that you're literally ripping your garment off, man. Man, off his head. That's serious. That's literally serious. And his beard, not just the hair on his head, and his beard. And he sat there just astonished. He just sat there confounded. And who knows what he was thinking in his mind as well. Who knows what he was thinking in his mind. Thoughts of stress probably came over him, being a leader of Israel. And really, I mean, when you look at Second Esdras, which the authorship of Second Esdras is also disputed, but nevertheless, in the narrative of Second Ezra, you have Ezra really pleading on behalf of his people. You have Ezra pleading on the behalf of his people for several chapters. And he's always pleading on the behalf of his people, just as Moses was as well. Moses, plenty of times, was pleading on our behalf that the Lord destroy us not because we're going the hell off, worshiping, or it's like being murmuring in the damn wilderness, right? Murmuring against Moses, bucking up against Moses. You understand? Worshiping this golden calf, to where Moses had to plead on our behalf, act as a mediator, just as Yahushua does, just as Ezra has done as well. And so Ezra is getting very stressed out. When you read this, he's getting very stressed out because of this, because our people don't want to separate themselves from the heathen of the land. And we're going to see what he says to them as well. All right. And we know that and when I say Nehemiah and Ezra was in the same spirit, is because they were. When you read Nehemiah 13, everybody knows what happened then. Nehemiah saw the men of Israel, in whose children they had children with the Moabites, they had children with the other nations, and their children couldn't speak a lick of Hebrew, and he contended with them. Man. He laid their hands on them, So Nehemiah, Ezra, they were in the same spirit, They just couldn't take wickedness. They couldn't they couldn't see their people living in wickedness. So, the things that we see on a day-to-day basis, I mean, they will probably I don't know what Ezra would do. I don't know what Nehemiah would do. If they saw what we saw on a daily day basis, we know that the Lord told Ezra in the book of Second Ezra, chapter 5 and 1. All right. Let's get that real quick if we can, through the spirit. So let's go to second Ezra. Hey, and this is funny. You know, this is a little funny because you could tell that our forefathers really love their people, man. Right? You could tell our forefathers really love their people because, you know, when we see this type of wickedness, we feel, you know, the same way. You know, brothers not really plucking their beard out, but they could really. Brothers could for real pluck their beard out, man, if they saw something that was just totally off, right? Hey, you know, if mine came, you know, I'll probably be plucking mine out. Who knows? Right? But nevertheless, like let's read this real quick. Let's go to Second Ezra chapter 5 and verse number 2. It says, "But iniquity shall be increased above that which thou now seest, or that thou hast heard long ago." So the Lord is telling Nehemiah that, I mean, it's like Ezra, that yeah, you see wickedness right now, but it's going to be increased, right? It's literally going to be increased. So if Nehemiah and Ezra saw the things that we're seeing on a day-to-day basis, they would probably just faint, honestly. You know, they would probably just be like, yeah, I don't know. All right, I don't know. But it just shows you that, you know, their spirit was just on fire for real. And so when you look at this, Ezra is praying a prayer unto the Most High in Ezra chapter 9. All right. So I'm gonna go to Ezra chapter 10 real quick. So let's see what Ezra did because of that. All right. So let's go to Ezra chapter 10. And let's go to Ezra 10 and verse number 5. Right. It says, "Then arose Ezra and made the chief priests, the Levites, and all Israel to swear that they should do according to this word, and they swear." You know how much power that takes? Right? You know how much power that takes? Now, you can't just read this like an Edomite. You know, as brothers always say, "Then arose Ezra and made the chief priests, the Levites, and all Israel." You can't just read it like an Edomite and then just close up the book and just be like, Khan, Ba Shema Mashaki Abshah. You know, sometimes you want to look at it and you want to also look at it in the lens of a so-called Jake or whatever, because we know that these are Jakes we're reading about. These are E's we're reading about. So you also want to look at it through, you know, really, I mean, their worldview for real. So when you read this, it says what? "Then arose Ezra, made the chief priests." So first of all, he made the chief priests, he made the Levites, he made all Israel swear that they should do according to this word. What is this word? This the word of the Lord. All right. And that sounds very similar to what? Moses. That sounds very similar to Moses. All right. Ezra was moving. That's what I was saying. Ezra was moving in the same spirit as Moses. It's not just because of this, it's a lot of different things, but this is one of them. All right. Let's go to the book of Ezra. Salaki, not Ezra, Salaki. Exodus. All right. Exodus. Salakia. Let me bring this precept out real quick. All right, this is the book of Exodus. All right, chapter 24. All right, let's go to Exodus chapter 24. All right, let me pull this up on the screen through the spirit. Let's go to Exodus chapter 24. How much you want to start at? Just get to the point, honestly. Ezra 24. And verse number 7. "And he took the blood of the covenant and read it in the audience of the people, and they said, All that the Lord hath said will we do, and be obedient. And Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people and said, Behold the blood of the covenant which the Lord hath made with you concerning all these words." So just as Ezra made all Israel to do according to the word and to swear unto the Lord of hosts, I mean, it's like you swear unto the Lord. Guess what? Moses did that same thing. Even when you go to Deuteronomy chapter 27. Damn it, hold on. Deuteronomy 27 and verse number, let's see here. Well, I mean, let me see. I mean, yeah, I mean, there's so many accounts for real when Moses did that. But I'm gonna just go right here. Deuteronomy chapter 27, verse 26. "Cursed be he that confirmeth not all the words of this law to do them. All the people shall say amen." So all the people, all Israel essentially was like, you know, they swear unto the Lord. that they would not, that they would not forsake the Lord, that they would not, leave off from keeping his commandments, which obviously, didn't go that way, right? But, all praise. I mean, nevertheless, that's why that's why we're here right now, right? That's why we're here right now. But nevertheless, moving on, right? Let's go to Ezra chapter 10, verse 6. Then Ezra rose up from before the house of the Most High, went into the chamber of Jonathan, the son of Eliashib, and he came thither. He did eat no bread nor drink water, for he mourned because of the transgression of them that had been carried away. Now let's keep going though. So let's see here. In verse 10. And Ezra the priest stood up and said unto them, Ye had transgression, have taken wives, strange wives, to increase the trespass of Israel. Now therefore make confession unto the Lord God of your father, and to do his pleasure, and separate yourselves from the people of the land and from the strange wives. Then all the congregation answered and said with a loud voice, As thou hast said, so must we do. You see that? So what was going on was Ezra, he was standing up, man. He was standing up for the law of the Lord. He said, take away those strange wives and put them away, man. Stop joining yourselves onto these other nations. We have to focus on ourselves right now. All right, we have to focus on ourselves right now. Ezra was very spiritual, man. He knew that the root, the problem was getting with these other nations for real. It's because we always want to do what they do, and we know that these other nations, they can't get right, man. They don't have the spirit of an Israelite. They're going to make you go off. You understand? And so Ezra was like, I should say it like this. Ezra was in the spirit, and like I said, going back to this point, Ezra, that took a lot of convincing. He had to go into the law. He had to make all Israel swear. So that means that he had to make all Israel on one accord for real. That takes a lot of manpower. That takes a lot of strength to do that. Not no ordinary man could just do that. You know how Israel is. Israel is rebellious, man. They see somebody in power, they're like, who the heck is this? Who are you to tell me to do X, Y, and Z? Who are you? That's how Israel acts. Who are you? But they respected Ezra because he was moving in a certain spirit, right? He was moving in a certain spirit, man. Ezra was probably what? What do you call it? Austere. When you go to Second Ezra chapter 5, he even details Ezra as being an austere man as well right here. Right, let's go to Second Ezra chapter 5 and verse number 16. And in the second night it came to pass that Shalathiel, the captain of the people, came unto me, saying, Where hast thou been, and why is thy countenance so heavy? Knowest thou not that Israel is committed unto thee in the land of their captivity? So Shalathiel was like, Hey man, where you been at? Where you been at? You just been out here in the field all day. Where you been at? So Shalathiel was saying this to Ezra, Up then and eat bread, and forsake us not, as the shepherd that leaveth his flock in the hands of cruel wolves. Then said I unto him, Go thy ways from before me, slack you from me, and come not nigh on me. And he heard what I said and went from me. So Second Ezra even details Ezra, as an austere man. All he said was to him, Hey, go thy ways from me, and come not nigh me. Hey, meaning get away from me. He said, get away from me. Right? Go thy ways from me and come not nigh me, man. Don't even come near me, bro. And he heard what I said and he went from me. So he didn't even try to convince him, right? Shalathiel didn't even try to convince him and and say, Hey man, come on, man, stop playing, bro. Come on. He didn't even try that. He just heard what he said and he just left. So Ezra was probably an austere man. He had the power of speech. You understand? In order for you to read the whole law before all Israel, in order for you to be a leader of Israel, you have to be, probably eloquent in speech. I mean, no man for real is going to follow somebody that can't speak. I mean, you got to be eloquent. We know that Moses, he couldn't really speak the language that good, or as good, or I should say as good as Aaron. That's why Aaron was the mouth, right? That the Lord told Moses, Aaron shall be thy mouth, right? So, Aaron as well was probably an eloquent speaker. We know that a lot of men, even in we look at Paul, right? Paul was, he became all things unto all men. He knew how to be that wise master builder. He knew how to give the people what they wanted in order to what, right? To convince them. So Ezra, that's the power that he had as well. So Ezra, hey man, it's just a mighty man overall. Just a mighty man overall. I mean, he was a scribe. He wrote down the words of the Lord. He had to write down, keep the records with him. I mean, he was a prophet as well. We know that Ezra was he prepared his heart to seek after the Most High. He was also a priest. I mean, just being a priest alone is a heavy lot, you know. So I mean, Ezra all around was just a mighty man for real. All right, all around was just a mighty man. So let's see if I have any more in those precepts of the spirit. All right, see if I have any more precepts on that. Yeah, Khan. So in terms of his spirit, there's a lot of more precepts we can get into on that, right? Yeah, and Khan, Shalom, Shalom, whoever on the line, Shalom, Shalom, all praises. Yeah, Khan's a brother Junamai said had that Nehemiah spirit, man. Yeah, he had the same spirit as Nehemiah. He had the same spirit as Nehemiah, man. Right? Okay. So let's move on in terms of the works that he's credited with, right? And like I said, there's a lot of more precepts I can get into in terms of Ezra being, the mighty man that he is. I'm pretty sure there's a lot of more precepts you can get into, but hey, I'm gonna just leave that to y'all. You know what I'm saying? I'm gonna just leave that to y'all. Read, Ezra. And like I said, Ezra is not only mentioned in the book of Ezra, he is mentioned in Nehemiah as well. Now, we're gonna move on to real quick for about a couple minutes, maybe even 20, I'm not sure, probably 20 minutes or so, going into textual criticism and going into the works that Ezra is accredited to writing. You understand? Just because you might see a book and it's somebody in that book is mentioned there, it just automatically means that they wrote that book. Not necessarily, right? Not necessarily. We know that certain books, they weren't the even though the name is of somebody, doesn't mean that they necessarily wrote it, right? Like Esther. So you have a book in the Bible called Esther. Doesn't mean that Esther wrote that book, right? It was a scribe. It was a scribe that wrote that book. Probably a man, because we know that a scribe is a man. It's a masculine noun. It's a man. They kept the records. All right. It's just how Israel did things. So let's go into a little bit of the textual criticism and talk about the authorship of these certain books. So and also, yeah, I just forgot to bring this out, but Ezra, that name is a Hebrew name, obviously, which means help. Okay. Azar, which comes from that verb azar, meaning to help or to support. All right. And some say that it could be a shortened version of the Hebrew word, of another Hebrew word, which means my help is God, or God is my help, right? Or God is my helper. But just Ezra alone just means help or helper, right? That's even with the blue letter it tests as well. So that's just to get that out there. So when you look up the authorship of Ezra, it says what? So-called, ish, right? Tradition has identified Ezra as the author of these books, and some modern scholars concur. According to many critics, however, the chronicler was a Levite cantor in Jerusalem. This position is supported by the author's concern with the Levites and cultic musicians. So, a lot of people say that Ezra wrote, Ezra, obviously. And that's what tradition says. Ezra wrote, what tradition really says, Ezra wrote Ezra and Nehemiah. Okay. And before, Ezra and Nehemiah were not two separate books. They were originally one book together. Ezra and Nehemiah, right? Were actually one book called Ezra. And scholars say this because whenever you had, for example, Josephus referred to Ezra, or the book of Ezra, it always included Nehemiah together. He never detailed a book called Nehemiah. It would just be called Ezra, right? So I'm gonna read this real quick. So Ezra and Nehemiah, the reason why it has this apostrophe here, or this dash here, is because they were not separate; they were the same. But because the modern Christian tradition, the book of Ezra and the book of Nehemiah are separate. In most Bibles that you have nowadays, they're separate. But in the original Hebrew manuscripts, they were for the most part, they were the same. It said Ezra and Nehemiah is a book in the Hebrew Bible found in the Kettum section, and the Kettum meaning the writings. All right, the writings. This is how the Hebrew Bible is constructed. You have the Torah, which will be the first 5 books. You have the prophets, which will be Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings. Well, really, I mean, it's different how Judaism separates it, because in Christianity, according to here, they kind of separate it a little differently. See, when you look at Christianity, they separate it from the Torah, which will be the Pentateuch. They call it the Pentateuch, right? The 5 books. They call a certain section of it the historical section, which will be Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st Kings. You understand? 1st Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. They wouldn't count Ezra and Nehemiah as prophetic. They would put that in the historical account, because that it is history, right? When you read Ezra and Nehemiah, it's not necessarily prophets. I mean, it's like prophetic. They're not necessarily prophetic books. Only 2nd Ezra is, right? But not necessarily Ezra and Nehemiah alone, right? Or Esther. Not necessarily prophetic books. They're historical, right? History of Israel. And you also have, the section of wisdom, which will be Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes. And you also got the prophets, right? So-called major and minor. But the Judaism, they kind of separated a little differently, as you can see here. They include Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings as prophets, whereas the Christians, they separate them. They don't call Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings prophets. They call them writings. You understand? But nevertheless, however you want to separate it, doesn't really matter. But I always saw, Ezra and Nehemiah as writings, because they detail our history. It says is a book in the Hebrew Bible found in the Kettum section. Originally, with the Hebrew title Ezra. The book covers the period from the fall of Babylon, 539 BC, to the second half of the 5th century BCE, and tells of the successive missions of Jerusalem, of Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah, and their efforts to restore the worship of the God of Israel and to create a purified, ish community, all right, which we know to be the Israelite community or the Jew community, all right. So, nevertheless, I want to skip down to this stuff. It says in this 19th century and for much of the 20th, it was believed that the Chronicles and Ezra and Nehemiah came from the same author or a circle of authors, similar to the traditional view, which held Ezra to be the author of all 3. But the usual view among modern scholars is that the difference between Chronicles and Ezra and Nehemiah are greater than the similarities. So the thing is, all right, certain prophets or certain scholars say that, okay, Ezra must have been the author of Chronicles, Ezra, and Nehemiah, because they have similarities between each other. In fact, how did Second Chronicles end? Second Chronicles end, if anybody remembers, the same way that the first book, Ezra chapter 1 starts. Oh, Salaki, I want to get the last chapter of that. Right, what is that? 36. Salaki. Get a quick for the spirit. Yeah, 36. Okay. So when you go to Second Chronicles 36 and 22, it says, now in the first year of King Cyrus, king of Persia, that the word of the Lord spoken by the mouth of Jeremiah might be accomplished, the Lord stirred up the spirit of Cyrus, king of Persia, that he made a proclamation through all his kingdom and put it also in writing, saying. So we know that Second Chronicles 36, these verses right here, 22 and 23, they're the same as Ezra chapter 1, verses 1 all the way through 4. They're the same, right? Now that's why, you know, that's another reason why some people would say, certain scholars will say, that Ezra and Nehemiah and even Chronicles was written by Ezra himself, but or the circle of authors, right? Circle of authors, because you know that, you know, there were other scribes during this time. It wasn't just Ezra himself. There were also other scribes. So, but I want to go to real quick. What was this at through the Spirit, right? So the thing is with Ezra is that we know that certain parts, when you go to Ezra chapters 1 through 6, it details Zerubbabel's ministry. And like I said before earlier in this video, Ezra is not even mentioned. He's not even mentioned until the 7th chapter all the way to the 10th, right? And it switches between, when it mentions Ezra, it switches between him being viewed in the third person to then now in the first person, and then it switches back to the third person. So it's, you know, it's kind of you know, how the text is compiled, it's a little hard to say, right? It's a little hard to say. I know certain scholars say that, you know, Ezra himself wrote it. Or could it be Ezra and some other scribes as well that attributed to that book? We know that, for example, with Jeremiah, we know that Jeremiah, you know, also had a scribe with him, Baruch. And Baruch, you know, really, although Jeremiah did write some of his own writings, it was really Baruch as well that was writing his book, that was writing Jeremiah. I mean, scroll Jeremiah. So this could also be the case as well in terms of Ezra and Nehemiah. All right. Now, the book of Ezra, you know, focuses in terms of its narrative, it focuses more on the rebuilding of the temple. Okay. Whereas, you know, we know that Nehemiah focuses more so on the rebuilding of the wall. Right. So let's go to real quick the Latin Vulgate, because most scholars would agree that Ezra and Nehemiah were together, right? They were one book. Now let's go to the Latin Vulgate real quick. All right, because when you go to the Latin Vulgate, right, some might be saying, hey, you know, what is that? Right? What is Latin Vulgate? You know, the Latin Vulgate does not have second Esdras, right? Latin Vulgate does not have second Esdras. Let me get this real quick. So first of all, when you go to the Vulgate, it says sometimes referred to the Latin Vulgate, is a late 4th century Latin translation of the Bible. The Vulgate is largely the work of Jerome, who in 382 had been commissioned by Pope Damasus I to revise the Ventus Latina Gospels used by the Roman Church. So essentially, this Latin Vulgate was translated by someone called Jerome, all right, in 382. And so he translated from the Hebrew text. He translated the Old and New Testament, I believe, from Hebrew text. The Old Testament from Hebrew text. And he translated that into Latin, while also using sometimes using the Textus Receptus. If anybody knows what the Textus Receptus is, that would be essentially, well, let's just pull it up real quick. Textus Receptus, or Slovakia, not the Textus Receptus, the Slovakia, the LXX, right? Septuagint, right? Slovakia. That the Textus Receptus. The Textus Receptus is actually the Greek New Testament of the Bible that that the KJV is rendered off of. Slovakia. So the Septuagint, sometimes referred to as the Greek Old Testament or the translation of the 70, and often abbreviated as LXX, is the earliest extant Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible from the original Hebrew. So the Septuagint is a very famous manuscript, because it was translated by our people. And even when you go to the book of Acts, when Stephen details the history and he details certain things, it's like he's referring to the Septuagint, because when you compare the Septuagint with the Masoretic text, in which the Masoretic text would be one of the Hebrew manuscripts that we have. Now, the thing is, if I'm not mistaken, the Greek manuscripts that we have in the Old Testament sometimes can even be older than the Hebrew manuscripts that we have right now in the Old Testament. All right. But nevertheless, we know that the Septuagint was translated by our people during the time of Pontius, or it's like not Pontius. What was his name? That Edomite's name, right? Pompey, I believe. All right. But nevertheless, right, when you look at this, it was Ptolemy, not Pompey, Ptolemy, right? Ptolemy the second. But anyways, it was translated by our people, right, from the original Hebrew that we had. Now, when you look at the Septuagint, it could have been very well, the fact that when you go up to the New Testament, during the time in the New Testament, some of our people were using the Septuagint to read the Old Testament, all right? And that would explain why in the book of Acts, chapter 7, Stephen is quoting a number from the Greek Septuagint. In order for me to demonstrate that, let me just demonstrate that real quick through the Spirit, right? Brothers is probably kind of confused right now. So lucky. Let me go to Acts chapter 7. Okay, let's go to Acts chapter 7 and verse number let's see here real quick. So okay, so lucky, I skipped it. Right here, right? Acts chapter 7 and verse number, right? Let's get this real quick to the Spirit. Okay, right here. So when you go to Acts chapter 7, verse 14, this is Stephen, right? Then sent Joseph and called his father Jacob to him and all his kindred, threescore and 15 souls. So threescore and 15 souls. Okay, so threescore means 60, 15. So 60, right, plus 15, which would be 75. So he counted 75 souls. He said that there were 75 souls, right? That, that were with Jacob for real. So altogether we're 75 souls. Okay. That's what he's saying in the book of Acts. When you go to the book of Exodus and you go to other precepts, right, like it. So let's go to Exodus chapter 1 and verse 1, right? Exodus 1 and 1. All right, let's get this real quick to the Spirit. It says what? Now these are the names of the children of Israel which came into Egypt. Every man in his household came with Jacob. Verse number 5, and all the souls that came out of the loins of Jacob were 70 souls, for Joseph was in Egypt already. So Exodus says it was 70, right? Exodus says it's 70. Let's go to Genesis, right? See what Genesis says. Genesis 46, right? And verse number, right? Let's see if it says the number. All right. Salakia. When to get threescore and 10. Okay. So when you go to verse 27, right, it says, and the sons of Joseph, which were born in him in Egypt, were 2 souls, all the souls of the house of Jacob, which came into Egypt, with threescore and 10. Threescore meaning what? Again, threescore meaning 60 plus 10 is 70. So Genesis says 70. Deuteronomy also says 70 as well. Just for the sake of time, I'm not going to pull it, but Deuteronomy also says 70. It was 70 souls. Exodus says 70. We have to understand that the KJV, the Old Testament, was translated from the Masoretic text. It wasn't translated from the Greek Septuagint. And so when you look at the book of Acts, but the thing is, we know that, Salakia. Hold on, what I do? Hold on, Salakia. Kind of went back in time through the Spirit. When you look at Acts chapter 7, Stephen is saying, hold up, he's not saying 70 though. He's not saying it was 70 souls. He's saying that it was actually 75. You're saying that it was 75 souls. So what's going on here? Why are you saying 75? But there's 3 precepts in the Old Testament that says it was 70. It's, it's highly likely because he's referring to the Greek Septuagint. We know that during the time in the New Testament, our people were speaking, Hebrew, and our people also knew Greek as well because we were under that captivity. We had just gotten out that captivity, right? We had literally just had gotten out that captivity. We know that during the Greco-Roman Empire, which is the time of Yahushua, the Greco-Roman Empire, that we were also speaking Greek. That's why when you look at the inscription in which Pontius Pilate wrote on the sepulchre, well, not the sepulchre, but when Yahushua was getting crucified, he wrote what? He wrote it in what? Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. Because that was the 3 main languages during that time in Israel. You had the Hebrew, you had our people coming in from Greece, they would be speaking what? Either Greek or Latin. All right. So it's not far-fetched for them to be reading, the Greek Septuagint. Now, I'm gonna prove that he was referring to the Greek Septuagint, most likely, all right? Because it makes most sense that way. So when you go to this real quick, right? The Greek Septuagint, let me pull this up. I don't want to get in the Greek because we also want to read it, be able to read it. And then as you can see, the Greek Septuagint also includes the Apocrypha. So, somebody say that is not, canon and whatever. We always included the Apocrypha. So let's get this real quick. What I want to go. Okay, Khan. Let's go to Genesis, right? So let's go to Genesis. The precept that I went to was Genesis 46, right? Genesis 46. And okay, so this is why I say that. This is Genesis 46 and verse number 27. And the sons of Joseph, which were born to him in the land of Egypt, were 9 souls. All the souls of the house of Jacob who came with Joseph into Egypt were 75 souls. But when you read it in here, it doesn't say 75. It says 70. All right. When you read it in the Masoretic text, it doesn't say 75. It says 70. But we see here in the Greek Septuagint, it's saying 75. And that's why in Acts chapter 7, it's saying that Stephen is saying 75 souls. So that's just one thing. All right. There could be other, I think there's another account in Acts as well, that they're quoting the Greek Septuagint and things of that nature. But, like I was saying, things like that. We're just looking at it like that. This is all textual criticism. And this is all, really all boils down to appreciating the scribes. Because if we didn't have manuscripts to compare and to contrast, that's why you got the Quran. You don't have got any other manuscripts to compare and to contrast. It's just this. That's it. It's just this. But with the Bible, you have so many, manuscripts to compare, to contrast. You have the Alexandrian tradition. You have the Byzantine tradition when it comes solely to the New Testament. That's why John chapter 8, verses 1 all the way through, a certain verse, that's not in certain Bibles because they translate it off of the Alexandrian tradition just because it's older than the Byzantine, tradition. So this is really just appreciating this, the work of the scribes, because if it wasn't for the scribes, then none of this stuff would even occur, right? We wouldn't even be able to look back at manuscripts to compare and contrast with if it had it not been for the scribes, had it not been for their ability to read and write, and for their ability that the Most High gave them to translate it. Because remember, Ezra, Nehemiah, they knew more than just one language. It wasn't just speaking Hebrew. Scholars say that Ezra was fluent in both Greek and Aramaic. So he knew how to read and write both. He knew how to speak it as well. He was able to speak and communicate with Artaxerxes. We know of a surety that during that time, Artaxerxes was not speaking Hebrew, right? Some might say that they were speaking Aramaic. Some might say that they were speaking a certain dialect of their own language. You know, whatever the case may be, that's not really what we're talking about this. But you get the point. I mean, they were able to communicate. All right. So somebody had to know somebody else's language. So we know that, you know, and again, going back to that definition of scribe, Ezra was a learned man. All right. Ezra was a learned man. But nevertheless, Vulgate. And the reason why I brought up the Latin Vulgate is because in the Latin Vulgate, we know that Jerome, he saw the book of Ezra and Nehemiah as one book. Right? He saw it as one book. But though he separated the two, he saw it as one book because he was translated in the Latin Vulgate, supposedly from the original Hebrew manuscripts. All right. Because it says what right here? What does it say? The Vulgate is usually credited as being the first translation of the Old Testament into Latin directly from the Hebrew Tanakh, rather than from the Greek Septuagint. So he literally took it from the Greek. It's like the Hebrew Tanakh, which is the Hebrew so-called Bible, right? So-called Old Testament. All right. So, yeah. So I don't really want to get too into depth into in terms of second Esdras though. All right, second Esdras is just a whole different type of video because that whenever we want to talk about who wrote second Esdras, it's not as plain as certain people think. It's not that plain. I just don't want to really get into that right now. But all praises to the Most High. So essentially, what I want to leave off with is let me get this real quick. Let me just pull this back up. Let me just pull this back up through the spirit, right? About to close out though, right? Because I think that's a lot of information. I think that is a very considerable amount of information. So who wrote Ezra? Or Salaki, what did Ezra write? So let me pull this up as well, right? This is what the scholars are saying. So it's saying what? In order to make sense of Josephus' enumeration of the biblical books, it must be assumed that he counted Ezra and Nehemiah as one. And that's what so-called Jewish scholars were doing. They were counting Ezra and Nehemiah as one book, right? It says what? The Talmud includes the activities of Nehemiah in the book of Ezra, and even as why then was the book not called by his name, where only Ezra is listed. Now, Masoretes clearly regard the book as one because they count Nehemiah 3 and 22 as the middle verse and add their annotations for the whole only at the end of Nehemiah. All right. The medieval so-called, ish commentators moved directly from Ezra to Nehemiah without interruption. All right. So a lot of scholars point, they say that the evidence points towards them, the Ezra and Nehemiah being one book written by Ezra along with, a group of scribes. All right. So Ezra wrote Ezra, and Nehemiah. That's what most of the evidence points towards. All right. That's what most of the evidence points towards. As far as the Chronicles, that's something else. But we know that Ezra did write Ezra, and he did write Nehemiah along with other scribes. All right, other scribal works. And like I said, it's always going to be just being real. As a brother, I'm not sure if this is a brother or sister, but none of it matters unless you're walking away. Yeah, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, who wrote what, it just doesn't matter for your salvation, right? It doesn't really matter for your salvation. It's really being fulfilling that precept in Sirach 5 and 15. Be not ignorant in anything in a great matter or small. So we don't want to be ignorant in anything. You know what I'm saying? So especially of us that want to be learned, and go into these certain things, it's just good to know. You understand? To know how our forefathers move. But really what I want to end off with is what? Let's go to Sirach chapter 10 and verse number 5, man. Let's go to Sirach chapter 10, verse 5. In the hand of God is the prosperity of man, and upon the person of the scribe shall he lay his honor. So we know that person of the scribe, upon the person of the scribe, the Lord is going to lay his honor, man. So we're just giving honor and respect unto the men that were before us who gave us this Bible. Right? Let's pull that famous precept in Psalms chapter 68 and verse 11. That's all we're doing with this video. We're appreciating the work that they put in. Okay, we're appreciating the work that they put in for us. We know that things are written so for our learning, right? Pursuant to what Romans 15 and verse 4. But you write something down so that you can look back at it, again. That's why you're writing it down. When you write down, okay, you said what? Okay, let me just write that down. You're writing that down to what? To memorize it, but also to what? Look back at it just in case you forget. That's what you're doing. That's why you're doing that for. That's essentially why things like this was written. The Lord said, go, write this in a book. Did not the Lord say, Ezra 2nd 15, the words that I speak, the words of this prophecy, write it in a book, for they are faithful and true. So these things are written for us. And so we just want to appreciate the work that they have put in for this. How many times, and you look at the how the Bible was preserved, men died, men fought there for their lives just to preserve this book, man. When you really go into it, Ezra, Nehemiah, putting in that work. You even have that account in 2nd Ezra 14, which I didn't really want to get into tonight. That maybe I could do it on a different video or something, because that's a lot within itself. It talks about the 96 books that he had written along with other scribes. So it's just a lot of work that our forefathers put in just to write this Bible down and to preserve it for us in these last days. It's a miracle. All praise to Yahweh that we even have these words with us right now. All right. And as scholars will say, the Bible is one of the most preserved texts of antiquity. It is the most preserved, because you look at any other text, it's only fragments, bits and pieces here and there. You understand? But this Bible, this word of the Lord, is one of the most preserved books in all of literature, all right, of antiquity. All right, that's been translated and preserved. So let's read this real quick. Psalms chapter 68, verse 11. All right, so like I said, all we're doing right now is giving honor unto and respect unto our forefathers that were before us, that fought and died for this word, just so that we can have it today. So Psalm chapter 68 verse 11. It's a lot of work, to keep account, to keep account of these things, right? So, right, you think you're safe. I'm not sure what you're talking about. So let's go to Psalm 68 verse 11. It says, the Lord gave the word, great was the company of those that opposed it. So the Lord, he gave the word, and great was the company that the Most High used to publish his word, man. So with that, all praises to Yahweh Ba'ashem, Hamashiach, Umalaki Abishah. Lord willing, this is edifying through the Spirit. Lord willing, if brothers didn't watch the whole thing, kind of wind it back, and try to see the spirit of Ezra, and all praises to the Most High. With that, Kwame Ashalib, to water for tuning in. Shalom.